Take 3. Yes, this is my third attempt. Never mind, we're getting there. We thought we'd do another proverb. Proverbs 11 verse 4, and it says, "Wealth is worthless in the day of wrath, but righteousness delivers from death." Now, the wisdom in this book has been described as skill for life, and there's much to be said for living well, isn't there? For making good decisions, for living wisely. But to what end? To what end? The proverb reminds us that history is actually heading somewhere. It's heading to a day of wrath. Now I can hear people's objections. I thought your God was a God of love. And we've talked about that many other times, haven't we? So I won't go there now. But we all want a God who judges wickedness. The cry from an early age is that's not fair. And that never really goes away. We all see evil and we want God to act against it. And the good news is that God will act against all the things that are evil, that are not right. The bad news is that our definition of wickedness isn't God's. His standard is higher than mine by a long way. And by his reckoning, I am truly wicked. Now, there's more we could say, but that's for another time. But at first glance, the writer seems to be tackling the subject of wealth. But then you have to say, well, actually, is it wealth or is it the subject of wrath? Wealth is worthless on the day of wrath. You see, it could be argued that actually it's not always the case. If you're in a spot of bother, money, you could bribe an official perhaps, or it may influence somebody, grease a few palms, get you out of the trouble. But of course, the day will be like no other. Zephaniah 1:15 describes it like this: that day will be a day of wrath, a day of distress and anguish, a day of trouble and ruin, a day of darkness and gloom, a day of clouds and blackness. The focus is really there on the day of the wrath, isn't it, rather than anything to do with wealth. And in the context of Zephaniah, they were awaiting the exile where God would judge them for their sin. And that was a day of the Lord. It was a dreadful day. It was God's judgment on them. Then we've also been talking about AD 70, haven't we, when the temple was razed to the ground by the Romans and Jerusalem as well. But it's not that day. It looks further ahead to the final day of the Lord. All the wealth we have worked for, all our savings, all our pensions, our property, all we've achieved and built up in this life will count for nothing on that day. Only righteousness will deliver from death. Again, in this world, possibly we might escape death by our righteousness. Maybe. Perhaps a person has been spared death because they were a good person. I don't know, maybe. But they still face death again. Eventually, we all do. Nobody's dodged it. And it's righteousness that will deliver from death. How so? Well, I'm with Isaiah on this one. My righteous acts are like filthy rags. Hopeless. My righteousness falls way far short of God's standard. Only the righteousness of Jesus can do it. But it will do it. It will deliver from death and wrath because he suffered the punishment in my place. So we rejoice. Perhaps with Paul we cry out in Romans 7 verse 24. Sorry, my arm's getting a bit tired here. Romans 7 verse 24. With Paul we cry out, "What a wretched man I am. Who will rescue me from this body of death? Thanks be to God through Jesus Christ our Lord." Okay guys, every blessing.